Greetings. In this video, we will be looking at the technical challenges presented by Preludio by Maximo Diego Pujol from his Suite del Plata No.1. We're going to go step by step through this piece from beginning to end. Let's go ahead and start at the very beginning. In our first measure, we have a D minor chord. Nothing too unusual here. We have a passing note in the bass, and then we get to this B flat. Right here, this change, we can get a nasty squeak out of our ring finger, so we just want to be very deliberate. At the end of the second measure, when you release that ring finger, just relax it in place, and then place the next finger. So on that last eighth note is really good timing to relax and then move. If you do that, it'll really help to mitigate the squeak that wants to happen out of your ring finger. Also, using your thumb is not necessarily going to prevent a squeak here, but it's going to help to cover the movement that's happening. So we want a nice clean sound going into measure 3. And here he indicates that we're just doing a partial bar. So right here I'm pressing with my index finger to hold that B flat, and then I'm just going to tilt my hand up when it's time to grab that F and make sure that your pinky's up and ready. So go ahead and let go of that pinky as soon as you play that E, because we're going to need it poised to drop on a G. And then we repeat the first 3 measures. When we go from measure 3 into measure 5, so that 2 point moving forward, I'm going to go ahead and do that right here. We're going to B flat, release the pinky, and here when I play F, I'm going to go ahead and split my pinky and my ring finger. So my pinky is poised to hit the G that I'm coming to, but my ring finger is ready to drop and reach out and grab that C. And that's a kind of an awkward angle for our ring finger, so we just need to be deliberate to give it a nice amount of force. So measure 3 into measure 5, I'm going to B flat, D, release the pinky, hinge, and split my fingers. And there's our C, tenuto. That little T-E-N dot is telling you to tenuto, which is just to hold that note, just a little extra length. Gives us some time to transition. What we can do, when you play that C, you can mute the first string and place your pinky on it. And then I have a guide finger to slide up into this chord. So moving through measure 5. I'm going to mute 1 and place my pinky on it, slide up to this weird chord we have. Now, this is one of the trickier chord changes in the piece. What I encourage you to do is take your middle finger while it's not being used and go ahead and place it on that first string. You're not going to put any force behind it. It's just lightly touching it. And then when we have to shift up, all your middle finger is going to do is slide sideways a little bit. So from here, I really have to focus on the pinky. And what I would encourage you to do also is take some time just to practice that transition with your pinky. Can you hammer it? Can you jump it quickly? And that's really the most difficult part, because your index finger just has to move from F to E, just 1 fret. And your middle finger can have a guide as it slides up. And so it's really just a matter of opening up that hand. Right here we have this kind of stretch we have to get if we're going to do the suggested fingering. We could just do an easier fingering, but for the sake of doing what's written, I'm going to guide both of these fingers. Be careful about sliding on this string because it can squeak, but it's still just a 1 fret shift. So I lift my index finger and place him. I guide my middle finger, and then I really focus on my pinky through this transition. One thing you can do is just practice that. If that gets to the point where it's easy to do, try hammering it. And can you do it quickly? And if you're really struggling with this chord change, one thing you can do, just do it 100 times, sleep on it. Do it 100 times the next day. And I mean hammering it. So hammer them down, hammer them down, hammer them down, hammer them down. And your pinky, will learn what to do. It has to get stronger, and we do need to stay nice and close with our hand so that our pinky doesn't have to do any crazy gymnastics. We need to find an angle at which our pinky can be secure. And if it's not secure and moving into that string, then you're going to have to figure out, how do I turn my wrist? Do I lift up more? Do I what? Experiment to figure out what's going to work for you. So moving on from this chord change, We pop up here. I like to just keep my hand kind of open here and just flat finger to grab that C sharp moving into measure 9. So end of measure 8, last 2 beats. I just reach up flat finger. A little bit of a rallentando. That means just slowing down. So here's how I like to handle this section right here. So starting at measure 10, it has this bar that it suggests. Well, we have to hold down F and C. But if we go ahead and scoot up to the point where I'm holding 3 strings, then I'm already set up to grab measure 11 also, and I don't have to do as much shifting. So going from measure 9 to measure 10, I have this C sharp, A, B flat, A. I'm going to do a 3-string bar, and nothing's really changing. And then all I have to do is move my middle finger up to grab B, and my ring finger shifts up to grab D. And then here's the really interesting part. I'm going to let go of these bass notes, because the last 8th note of the measure, you're not going to notice that the bass note is getting cut off there. So what I'll do is I'll release everything and put the base of my index finger on F. I find this to be the most effective way of handling the next measure, which is really what trips up most people when looking at this piece. You'll see why if you give it a try. If I try to use my index finger and then reach up and grab G and B flat and try not to bump D and then be able to grab this G with my pinky also, it's just really, really uncomfortable, weird angle. It's doable, but I think it's a lot easier if I simply use the root of my index finger to grab that as though I was going to do a hinge bar, but I never hinge. If I do this, there's my F and G, D open, B flat, and it's so much easier at this angle to grab this G. So here's what that looks like. Starting in measure 9, the halfway point. I have my C sharp in the bass and E. I start with a half bar on this measure, and I just stay all 3 strings barred down with my index. And then right here, I just shift up to grab that F. And I just stay on this weird hinge index finger. And then lift. And I'm just going to play through it so you hear what it sounds like, starting on measure 10. If you're really listening for it, you might notice that that B cuts off briefly, but I think it sounds fine to have a break between your bass notes. If I were playing cello and just doing that one line, I might add that deliberately. So I would encourage you to give that a try. It's definitely an odd way of approaching it, but it works well for me. And if you have any thoughts on that, definitely drop it in the comments. I'd be curious to hear if that's helpful or if you think it's sacrilegious or whatever your view is on that. Moving on from there, so we have this suspended into A dominant to D minor on measure 14. And then we have a lot of repetition here. And then moving through, you'll see the line that starts with measure 19. I believe the 3rd measure of that line is just an accidental inclusion from copying and pasting music earlier in the score. It doesn't really sound that good to include that measure. So I actually drop measure 21 entirely. I keep the numbers the same just for the sake of effective communication. So I will refer to the following measure as 22 and so forth and just match what the rest of the score says. But I would just take a pencil and X it out or scribble it out or put a circle just to indicate that it's not supposed to be there. And move on to our C chord. We already looked at this guy. This is all going to be the same all the way up until the end where I have half a measure of this funky chord we had earlier to our A dominant and our F at the end. For the very last 2 measures, I would just be very deliberate that it's an F in the melody, E, F. And you have to wait an extra couple beats for that last F also. So be really careful not to play the lower notes too loud, or it draws away from what's really happening in the melody. So if I were to start in measure 28, we have an F, G, F, F, E, wait for it, F. So it's very slow. It's almost as though the piece is dying out. So you need to be very careful about that middle voice. If you're playing those middle notes too loud and play the last measure, that sounds like a really natural place to settle is on the D. So looking at measure 27, if I were to go F, E, D, and then, oh, but there's an F, and it's kind of a weird, it can throw you off. So that D really needs to be quiet, or else it's going to pull the ear into a wrong melody. So F, E, extra soft, F. And make it really clear that that's our landing at the end. And it's not that satisfying of an ending. The most satisfying ending is usually landing on 1, our root, D. We're playing in D minor, so D is home. So to land on F kind of tells us that something's coming. And then we move into the rest of the suite. So I would encourage you just to be deliberate about that. Make sure you're using rest strokes on those melody notes. You know, if you use your ring finger right here, and you have a nice long nail on there, you can get a nice strong projection, while these free strokes are just distinguished and less easy to mix up from your melody. So I'd encourage you to practice that, get your hands used to it, and it will really emphasize the music as it is written. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this was helpful to you, and God bless.